You take the second highest performing country, you take a China, no way that's going to happen. And that's not to say that Chinese athletes don't have any opinions. I'm sure they do. They're human beings like everyone else. It's not like they are completely thrilled with the way things are run in China. It's just they have no choice. If they dared voice them on the international stage, or if they went down on one knee to, let's say, bring light to oppressed Muslims in concentration camps in China, right? They would be arrested or worse the second they got back to mainland China.
Namaste everyone. Welcome to Citti Media. Today we have a very special guest amongst us. He's a very dear friend of mine. We've grown up in Bangalore, debating each other on a whole lot of topics. And may I take pride in saying that he recently graduated in international economics from George Washington University. He is Anish Anandaram, and he is a podcaster, he's a content creator, and runs a very interesting channel called A Whole Lot of Grey. Anish, welcome to the show.
Hey Sharon, thank you so much for the flattering introduction and for having me. I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Anish. Likewise, going right into the conversation, the entire speaking point, everyone's talking about it. Olympics are happening, but with a lot of changes, if I may say so. This time you see a lot of athlete activism. People are going down on the knees, they're raising their fists, and they're protesting some form of tyranny or injustice or another. But do you think this is reserved for the privileged few? How do you see these observations, and how do you look at it? Look at these developments in the current socio-political context.
I think it's a very valid question, especially in the middle of the Olympics. So I have a couple of observations on it. My first one is, look, I do believe that athlete activism has some sort of utility and it does have its place, especially if it's a genuinely just cause, right? You saw in the wake of the George Floyd murder in the United States, a lot of athletes around the world using their platform to talk about police brutality, right? And that's fine, because I think we can all agree that we don't want police forces around the world harassing innocent civilians. Sure. Where I have a problem with athlete activism in general is, look, the average person is not like me and you, Sharon, wherein we're having these current affairs shows and podcasts and conversations, right? The average person is apolitical. So athlete activism is valuable in that sense, in terms of making apolitical people at least aware that something is happening, right? Whatever your thoughts on police reformation in the United States may be, whether you think they're doing an amazing job, you think they're not doing an amazing job, you at least know this is an issue being discussed if you see your favorite athlete go down on one knee or raise their fist or whatever their form of expression they choose may be. Now, I think unless this, initial excitement of, oh, okay, my favorite athlete, LeBron James or Roger Federer or whoever, posted about this, right? If you can't translate that initial excitement and momentum into actual tangible change, then it's just going to be a loop, right? Wherein every 4 years, these problems are still going to happen, whether or not your favorite athlete tweets about it. And you get awareness only in those 4 years, or only during the Olympics, or only when something so bad that these athletes take a stand for it happens, right? So that's kind of my 2 cents. And of course, regarding your second question, which I think is very important for people to understand, is absolutely it is for a privileged few. Because look, let's be honest, right? The fact that you can, go down on one knee at an international arena, kind of bringing light to an issue you feel passionate about, it's something a lot of countries do not permit, whether it's against your domestic government or not. A lot of countries do not permit that, right? Take one of the highest performing countries in the Olympics, or take two of the highest performing countries in the Olympics, are the United States and China, right? I think therein you see a huge contrast in what can be expected, right? American athletes, obviously, they get a lot of flack for going down on one knee. They do get accused of, not being patriotic enough. I'm not saying it's easy. Sure, it is tough, right, to go through that sort of uncomfortable treatment from your own people. But at the end of the day, they can do it. They can do it anywhere around the world without the fear of retribution that, okay, when I land in America, I'm not going to be arrested because I did this. I'm just going to book an Uber from the airport, go home, live the rest of my life, right? And people can disagree with me. And that is a privilege because that shows, okay, like freedom to express yourself, express your own opinion. You take the second highest performing country, you take a China, no way that's going to happen. And that's not to say that Chinese athletes don't have any opinions. I'm sure they do. They're human beings like everyone else. It's not like they are completely thrilled with the way things are run in China. It's just they have no choice. If they dared voice them on the international stage, or if they went down on one knee to, let's say, bring light to oppressed Muslims in concentration camps in China, right? They would be arrested or worse the second they got back to mainland China, right? So absolutely, let's not forget that while athlete activism has its place, it's always good I think if you have any kind of platform, raise awareness to as many issues as you can. But those two things, let's not forget that one, unless this sort of initial excitement convinces apolitical people to become more socially conscious and translates into tangible policy reforms, and two, unless we all acknowledge that, wow, it's such a privilege in the first place to be able to express yourself as an athlete. If we don't acknowledge these two things and we're not aware of these two things, we're going to find ourselves having similar conversations until the end of time.
Those are very good points made. Now, since we are talking about Olympics, there's one more name that's become very popular in the last 2-3 days at least. I mean, it's been popular for a while now. That's Simone Biles, right? Especially around how mental health, given the fact that we are going through a pandemic, and a very deadly one, that is, we've lost a lot of us have lost close ones. And I think instead of being a stigma, for the first time, it's actually being acknowledged. Do you think it is only because a pandemic has forced us to look at mental health in a positive sense, or do you see any other reasons for this?
Yeah, so I think that's a very valid question, Sharon, as it pertains to mental health, right? So I think to answer your question, I don't think that, look, I'd like to think at least that we as a human race rather, are not more depressed than we've ever been. I think it's a situation where we've always grappled with depression, we've always grappled with anxiety, mental health, all these issues. And this is kind of the first time, as you rightly said, in human history, where we can talk about it with some degree of candor and honesty without being labeled weak or, none of that stuff is real. Just be tough, right? I think people are understanding that, okay, mental health is something that people grapple with. You look at Anthony Bourdain, he had everything, right? Legendary chef. He had multiple Netflix specials, was obviously a multi-millionaire, had all the money, fame, everything. And unfortunately, he still took his own life, right, as a result of depression. There's a great saying which says that you can't put a dollar sign on a peace of mind. And I think that's absolutely true. People need to understand that, look, it's okay to struggle with these mental issues. It's okay to struggle with anxiety, stress, and depression. Just know you're not alone. And I think the Olympics have done a fantastic job of that, because an athlete you spoke about, Simone Biles, she's one of the greatest gymnasts of all time, if not the greatest. And she withdrew from partaking in the final, representing the United States at the Olympics, right? So it shows people that, hey, listen, if someone like Simone Biles can grapple with anxiety and stress and depression, I'm not a loser or a weak individual for, having difficulties of my own. So I think it has done a great job of highlighting it. And hopefully, like I said, in response to your previous question, we can translate again this form of athlete activism to tangible policy reforms, right? And that hopefully means a greater number of psychiatrists, greater number of therapy centers, greater number of counselors at schools, offices, or any sort of public life, right? And we can all come together to hopefully translate, the Simone Bileses of the world, showing us that, hey, it's nothing to be ashamed of, to tangible policy reform where people are, less depressed. The number of people going to therapy is like at an all-time low, right? So that's hopefully the positive shift we can see from the much needed awareness about issues surrounding mental health.
Thank you for that elaborate answer. Going slightly off topic, but limiting ourselves to the United States, what we are seeing in the recent time is perhaps a reenactment of the Cold War, especially given the fact that Amazon and a few other private players have gone into a space race, right? How do you view this, especially given the fact that there is a debate, at least in the United States, of a post-capitalistic society already?
Right. Very interesting observation as we're talking about current affairs after all, right? I think it's a very interesting observation. And straight off the bat, I have a couple of thoughts, right? Look, you see a lot of people trying to villainize the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks and the Richard Bransons of the world by virtue of them spending their money on going to space, right? I've come across this meme fairly frequently in recent weeks saying that, oh, okay, Jeff Bezos had two options to either end poverty in sub-Saharan Africa or go to outer space. And he chose the latter for 5 minutes, right? Now, while that's obviously very amusing, it betrays a lack of basic understanding of basic economics. And I'll tell you why. Look, when you Google Jeff Bezos' net worth and it says $150 billion, it doesn't mean that he has $150 billion chilling in his bank account that he can just GPay you at any point in time, right? The assumption is a combined worth of all his assets plus all his houses, all his cars and jets and yachts and real estate holdings and stocks, all of that, right? If they were sold immediately at the share price that they are commanding at that point in time, that total monetary figure will be close to $150 billion. You know what I mean? It's if he sold absolutely everything he owned and all of it didn't depreciate in value, didn't decrease in value, then he would have an estimate of $150 billion. But so people need to understand that straight off the bat that no, Jeff Bezos can't end poverty in sub-Saharan Africa by himself, all right? Because he doesn't have $150 billion chilling in the bank account. So that's something, a fundamental misconception I'd like to debunk straight off the bat, right? Now, going into, so I don't think, so personally, I don't think it's an issue that he's opting to do this. Now, on the space race itself, I think it's very important for people to understand that, believe it or not, the main motivation for us to go to space is not just, oh, wow, how cool the Earth looks from outer space or our orbits or galaxies and none of that, right? The main reason is obviously curiosity fuels a lot of human innovation, no doubt about it. But the main motivation, since that we have been to space during the Cold War, right, as you rightly pointed out, is to see if there's anything we can import or bring back from space that will enhance our quality of lives here on Earth, right? People believe that a lot of the microbial life in extraterrestrial spaces and in outer space, for lack of a better term, actually could be used in, actually could be used in renewable resources, could be used in cures to diseases that we don't have cures to already. It could be used in, if we travel enough to outer space, we understand, okay, like how does satellite positioning work? Because we send satellites to space, right? To watch TV, watch videos, to have this call and interview, right? We rely on satellite positioning. Understanding space travel can help us understand these things. And if we understand satellite positioning in its truest form, right? Think of it like you have virtual eyes on planet Earth at any given point in time. We can really, really enhance our quality of life by virtue of preventing earthquakes, by virtue of preventing any sort of natural calamities if we use satellite positioning the right way, because we'll have data on different parts of the Earth, and we can really, really, really utilize that degree of satellite technology only if we go to space, only the more if we travel more and more to space, right? So that's my thoughts on it, that people need to stop looking at it like, oh, okay, is there some ego behind it? I'm sure. Is it very expensive? Absolutely. Can the average person go to space? No, all those things are correct. But we need to understand that the motivation as a human race for going to space is much bigger than, oh, look how cool it is, I've gone to space, right? I truly believe that our quality of life, especially through satellite positioning, because we rely on satellite imaging for current disaster management plans, so imagine how much better we can get at relief management, risk management, preventing earthquakes, tsunamis and stuff if we go to space and enhance satellite technology. So through this and ultimately interacting with microbial life that could play a key part in, any sort of medicines or renewable substances here on Earth, I think are not possibilities that should be taken lightly. And it should, encourage and inspire some optimism in us as a human race that, wow, okay, we no longer rely on governments to do this for us. We're relying on private entities to, like I said, especially through satellite positioning and interact with microbial life, enhance our standard of living here on planet Earth. So I personally am very optimistic. And for people who are still skeptical, because it's not run by the government, like you said, this is a Cold War of sorts, a space race fought by private corporations. People who are skeptical of that, ask yourself this: whose full-time job is it to take care of you? Jeff Bezos's or your elected representatives, right? Who makes a sworn oath that they have your back and they have your best interest at heart? The guy who runs Amazon, or you're elected in the Indian context, MP or MLA, right? And I feel like that's something people need to understand before we just go and point fingers that Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson and Elon Musk don't really have a sworn duty to kind of make our lives better, but our elected officials do, right? Around the world, in India, United States, wherever else. So that's what I would, urge people to look at it through that lens, because I do believe we will be beneficiaries as a human race of, more and more space travel.
Very interesting. Anish, coming a little more closer to where we are, in Afghanistan, we've seen a huge exercise being withdrawn. I think perhaps after Vietnam, the embarrassing misadventure that the US has gone through and the terrible failure that it may have experienced, although it doesn't admit to it. For the first time, you've seen the international troops slowly pull out of Afghanistan, and the Taliban is taking over. And this sort of changes the entire geopolitical situation in the Indian subcontinent. Uh, how do you see the foreseeable future, especially with India being in the context of the US exit from Afghanistan?
Look, so I think that's a great question, right? And I think from the Indian context, there's two very important things to keep in mind. So Russia has called a meeting, right? I believe in mid-August in Qatar, wherein they've invited the United States, they've invited China, they've actually invited even Pakistan to, discuss the future of Afghanistan, right? Following this power vacuum of sorts. And India is specifically left out of that meeting, right? So while that's obviously disheartening at the start, because let's be honest, in geopolitics, whether it's geopolitics or in life, nobody wants to be left out of meetings, especially if you're a stakeholder, right? Whether it's at your workplace or at the international arena. So while that may be disheartening, I think there's still reason to be optimistic, because Prime Minister Modi is actually about to become the first ever Indian head of state, if I'm not wrong, to preside over a United Nations Security Council meeting in the first week of August. And the resolution that the United Nations Security Council seeks to resolve under, Modi presiding the session is the situation in Afghanistan. So India, by definition, is going to have a serious seat at the table, even before, the United States, Russia, Pakistan all convene in Qatar. So while the fact that we're not invited by Russia is a bit disheartening, the fact that Prime Minister Modi is going to be our first ever head of state to preside over the Security Council meeting about Afghanistan should also, counterbalance that discouragement and should inspire some amount of pride and optimism that, okay, we're not going to be completely left blindsided whatever happens in Afghanistan, right? You can assume that if they're discussing it in a meeting that our prime minister is presiding over. Now, what is also interesting to note is, it's very interesting because China is obviously in pole position to, kind of galvanize change in the Afghanistan region after the American troops leave, right? And that obviously raises a lot of security concerns for us in India. Because look, China and Pakistan don't make our lives easy on the border, either side of the border. And now if we have Afghanistan out west, it's kind of like one more potential hostile regime, right? It's kind of something we need to watch out for. So I think this should hopefully inspire all people here in India that look, regardless of what your domestic politics may be, right? Regardless of who you vote for in the Lok Sabha elections, if you are not going to, be united in a time of serious foreign policy, right? Where serious foreign policy is required, where we're going to be surrounded by a bunch of hostile actors, then that's just flat out disappointing. Because whether or not you agree with, the current government's position on, say, a tax rate or healthcare or any of these things, right? We all collectively have to come together as Indians when it comes to national security. I don't think there's any, even though I run a podcast called A Whole Lot of Gray, I don't think there's any gray area in this situation. I feel like it is not a black or white one to say, or it's rather, it is a very black or white one to say, listen, if you don't have our national security interests at heart, that is flat out shocking. So like I said, we have one reason to kind of be a bit pessimistic because we're not invited by Russia. We have a reason to be optimistic because Prime Minister Modi is presiding over this Security Council session. And ultimately, the conclusion that most Indians and everyone listening to your show who's based in India should be cognizant of is, okay, national security, especially in the South Asian region, is of paramount importance to us as Indians. And we need to monitor the situation very, very, very closely. As to what China's motives are in Afghanistan, only time will tell. But it is, again, extremely hypocritical, if nothing else, right? How, the Taliban, obviously non-state actors, right? Flat out organization that's been flat out, guilty of multiple terrorist attacks around the globe, obviously notably some here in India as well. They claim to, have the best interests of Islam and all these Muslims at heart. But I find it a bit amusing how they're willing to do business with China. They're willing to play ball with China, even though China, on the record, has tens of millions of Uighur Muslims locked up in concentration camps, right? And yeah, so ultimately, I think it's just an example that, ultimately, if you have a strategic interest to provide somebody, everything else goes out the window. So I hope people are aware of this and actually call out the smoke screen for what it is, that we shouldn't let China's and the Taliban's rhetoric get to us, because they're in bed with each other despite China locking up innocent Muslims, right? And being in bed with a violent Muslim non-state organization, right? Or rather a violent non-state organization that claims to have the best interest of Muslims around the world at heart. So I think people should not forget this double standard, make good note of it, especially here in India, and recognize that, okay, we need maybe some extra eyes on deck as it comes to our national security situation. And only time will tell what China's true motives are.
Right. Anish, I think this was a fantastic session. And thank you so much for those elaborate answers that you've given. Of course, at the request of Anish, I insist all of you to check out his podcast. There are some very interesting content. The links are given below in the description. Having said that, there is a popular phrase when it comes to Afghanistan. It says that you have the watch, but we have the time, is what the Taliban says. And unfortunately, unlike the Taliban, we don't have enough time. So we'll have to sign off right now. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Anish. This has been a very wonderful session. And for our viewers, please do like, share, and subscribe. I am your host, Sharan Citti, and this is Citti Media. Namaste.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.